Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar on getting serious about document management in Office 365. My colleague Jill today will be talking about managing files in document libraries. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar. We'll try to keep it to a 45, 50-minute session and leave about 10, 15 minutes for questions at the end. We encourage you to ask your questions. Please don't hold back. You can use the questions pane in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll leave them towards the end, but we'll try to get to all questions. If we don't, maybe we'll do a blog post or something afterwards. And then we'll send a link with the recording and the slide deck either later this afternoon or first thing Monday. And with that, I think, Jill, we're ready to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Sasha. Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome to our conversation today on getting serious about document management in Office 365. So our focus today is going to be managing files in document libraries. We kicked this off earlier in the summer with a conversation around document libraries or around document management strategies for Office 365. We got such a good reception and I got a lot of feedback following that conversation that we decided to keep the conversation going and to dive a little bit deeper into some other topics. So today's focus is going to be around managing document libraries and files in document libraries. And we have a few others planned for a little later in the year as well. So just a quick note about me. I'm Jill Hannemann. I'm a principal here at Witham Digital. I've been in the knowledge management space for over 15 years now, and I've been working with SharePoint since 2007. So when I started working with portals and document management and content management solutions, it's really around the lens of knowledge management and file organization and making sure that it's easy for organizations and individuals to create, store, and share their content and their knowledge. So one of the things that really drew me to SharePoint initially was just how easy it integrated with Office products. Office products are king. We all use Word, PowerPoint, Excel daily in order to communicate, to convey ideas, to transact, and to store our knowledge, essentially. And one of the barriers to entry was being able to easily store and download and edit that content. SharePoint was, and made sense, one of the few products out there that did that so seamlessly. And today, here we are looking at Office 365. I'm blown away and excited by how the product has evolved and what tools we have available to us, not to mention just the advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning. So that's really where I come from in this conversation in sharing this information with you. And just kind of a personal tidbit about me. I love food. You'll see that in my demo a little bit later. But I love to cook in my spare time, and it's definitely a hobby of mine. So now that it's fall and I'm in Seattle, so it is really fall here. The leaves are starting to turn, which is really nice, but that crisp air makes me want comfort foods. And so we've started doing some bakes and soups in my household. So just a quick word about Witham Digital. Witham Digital, actually, we're formerly Portal Solutions. We joined Witham about a year and a half ago, but Portal Solutions and Witham Digital now, we have a combined history of 15, 16 years in the SharePoint space. So we have, as a result, have done over 400 implementations of Office 365 and SharePoint on premises. So today we still do both, and we've expanded a lot of our services into Dynamics 365 to Exchange and a lot of the other workloads that exist in Office 365. So we have been around for a long time, and we have been able to have a very close relationship with Microsoft. So as a result, we have a couple MVPs on our staff, and what I love to say is that it's really difficult to be an expert in all of these pieces of Office 365, but I love that I have a team behind me that has experts in all these different disciplines. So if I don't have the answer to one of your questions, I'm almost positive that I know someone within our team that can answer your question. So feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you're thinking. And with that, we'll kind of dive right into it. Document management for Office 365. We're going to focus on document library settings. So I do have a demo for you later on in the presentation to walk you through modern document libraries and to just talk about some of the configuration settings. Then we're going to talk about file management, best practices, file lifecycle, applying security, and some of the updates that Office 365 is getting. So before we do that, what's really nice for me to get a better sense of where you all are at is a quick poll. So if you could quickly reply and let us know what's your document management system? So you may be in transition. So if you could also answer in kind of a to be fashion, that'd be great too. Okay, last call for responses. All right, why don't we go ahead and share the results if we're able to. Okay, so it looks like a solid group of you are only using Office 365. And then some of you are also, yes, sort of combination of Office 365 and something else. And so that's also very common. I will, full disclosure with them, we're Box users. So we have Office 365 and Box. So that's kind of, us also participating in that yes sort of category. And then 18% are using network file shares. Great. Thank you very much for participating and getting back to our conversation now. I'm gonna trust that you all can see my screen again. All right. So document management. Really the fundamental actions that we're talking about: creating, sharing, discovering, and that's really the heart of what a lot of the tools do. So over on the right side, we have just kind of a simple listing of some out of the box features that really support document management. And what I think is really interesting, 18% of you said that you're still using file shares. You're not alone. I actually meet with a lot of organizations and I work with a lot of groups who are still using file shares, and you may actually have an Office 365 tenant. You may have a subscription already, and you're using it for email. You might be on Skype for Business, for telephony and for presence and chatting, but you're not using some of the document management file features yet. And what I think is just so interesting is that a lot of what your users probably are craving, it's just straight out of the box. Co-authoring is probably one of the biggest differentiators I think that Office 365 can bring to your team. And then just the idea of sharing content internally and externally with your teammates is just another really great feature. So with these two in mind, there's a host of other components. This is a very complex tool, and I fear that I'm only going to really be scratching the surface with all of this, but I'm going to try to give you a good highlight and overview of some strategies to set up document management. So with storing content, that's kind of where we're going to kick off, because that's where a lot of confusion comes into play, especially with all the different tools that you have with Office 365. So I've fundamentally highlighted the three workloads that we're really going to focus on as far as where you keep files and where files are stored. And so that's SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business, really great, incredible 1 terabyte of space per user. I hope no one ever really needs that, but maybe you do if you use media and you have large file sizes. But yes, that is a lot of storage, and that's great. It's awesome. But you have a lot of options as far as where you store your files. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, what the underlying technology driving all of these is a document library. And this is a concept very native to SharePoint. So a document library fundamentally is the same construct that is storing your files in each one of these 3 workloads. And the purpose and the audience of that workload just changes and kind of dictates which one you may use. So OneDrive for Business, of course, is for the individual. And what I like to kind of make a comparison to is anyone who's using Google Apps or the Google Suite. This is essentially like your Google Drive. So it's your drive, it's where your files are. And yes, you can share files out from your OneDrive to other individuals, but effectively what this should replace is you storing any files on a M drive or on your local drive on your machine. Then SharePoint and Teams are essentially one and the same. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but where you put these is really going to depend on what UI you are looking to use. So that's kind of really one of the fundamental differences. I'm going to share this slide. I'm sure many of you have already seen this slide already because it's finally Microsoft is being prescriptive and telling you and clarifying when to use which workload. So SharePoint, our content and document collaboration framework, this is our content collaboration piece, what's driving our document management. Inner loops, this is where Microsoft is recommending that what interface you use to do some of that document management with your core teams. And so they describe the inner loop as the people that you work with regularly on core projects. And so that would be the people in your department, or if your department is very big, the smaller group sub-department that you work in. So those 5-10 individuals that you work with on a regular basis. And then outer loop, Yammer. So we're not really going to touch on Yammer a whole lot, but this is a great vehicle for exchanging information across the organization. And then email, Outlook for everything else, for exchanging information and transacting with other colleagues and partners and customers. So I'm going to continue on with this these strategies for organizing files. and where you should store your content. So fundamentally, I do think that this is the consideration tree that you should think through as you're structuring how to set up your document repositories in Office 365. I think security really ought to be one of the primary drivers, and there's a lot of logic behind that. Obviously, organizations are set up to a certain extent hierarchically, or they're broken out, and then there is some mild hierarchy in that organization structure. If your organization is completely flat, that's totally fine and great. And I think that this whole shift could go from being downward into just horizontal. But the reality is that there is some hierarchy, some slope in the way we're organized as organizations. And what we want to do is we want to inherit that security as much as we possibly can. So there is some intelligence to the way IT has organized your Active Directory groups, and we want to try and follow that structure. Or if your Active Directory is a bit of a mess, it's sometimes a really great opportunity to encourage a cleanup so that it can readapt to the organizational structure that you currently have. But there is a lot of sense in starting off your organization of your file storage based on that security structure, and following that and leaving inheritance based on Active Directory and that structure to kind of dictate what people have access to. It's oftentimes, especially for large organizations, the easiest way to make sure that a content location or a file repository is secure to the right people. And then what happens as you get down to the bottom of the funnel, where you have those small teams or projects that may require even more restricted security, or certain file types, HR personnel files, as you get deeper into that pool of the sphere of who has access to what, it becomes a lot easier to manage broken inheritance of security as you get further down that funnel and you limit the amount of people who have access to something. So I always like to say, when you're looking to create your IA, and especially from a file storage perspective, there is some intelligence to following that security structure initially. The next piece is audience members and members of those groups, and looking at who you're collaborating with, who needs to see those, who needs to see the content, and then finally the longevity of the group. How long will this group exist? How important is this content to a group that they're able to see this content for an enduring amount of time? And not to say that anything has to go away, but again, as you kind of look down this graphic that I've created here, our department content for all company, this is probably something that content's probably not going to go away, or if the department does go away, it will probably get reorged or reshifted somehow, some way. But as you get into your small teams and your projects, you can see a little bit more volatility in the change of the group, in the change of the content, in the draft nature of the content that it's storing, and also perhaps the promotion of the work products that a small team or project may create that would move up that funnel into a department, into a community of practice, or some sort of cross-functional group, and then maybe even to the department company level. So, policies are always a really great example. This could be something, a revision or a draft of a policy might be something that exists and occurs in an approval chain in a collaborative way in a small team or project in a very secure area that gradually gets approval or moves up to a department where it will live, or gets pushed out to the department company, department content for all company. So your publishing chain could also occur in moving up this funnel where it started, more closely down at the bottom. So you'll notice that I have Teams and SharePoint listed for all of these. Again, a large amount of where you do some of this work will depend on the user interface that your users like and what they feel comfortable with. And if you have some legacy SharePoint users, they may be really comfortable working with SharePoint. But what I like about SharePoint for some more permanent content is that it can be an elevation as far as that site structure interaction. So setting up your hub sites, having file repositories kind of at this department, all company level, or maybe in a more collaborative department level that that have that that website kind of navigation feel. But there's not to say that you couldn't still use SharePoint for small teams and projects. It's been done for many years. The capability is still there. But I personally really like the Teams interface, and I've seen a lot of other organizations find a lot of success in the Teams interface as far as some of that day-to-day work, more collaborative type engagement going on. So there you go. Aligning apps with document management scenarios. If you attended our last webinar, this is a carryover, but I just like to think through different scenarios that we have for document management and what is the appropriate app for the practice. So again, what you'll see in a lot of these is that Teams and SharePoint are overlapping. I can't say enough good things about Teams, and if you are if you are starting off with Office 365, get your folks on Teams. Put some governance, learn a little bit more about it, put some governance around it. Don't let it become the Wild West out the gate, but it's really easy to use. It's really easy to train your users, and it's easy for them to adopt, and they can get started with small group collaboration, file sharing, and collaboration really quickly. One of my colleagues, Melissa Hubbard, just did a webinar on Teams a few weeks ago, and I think we do have the video for that posted somewhere, so on our site. So I would definitely encourage you to learn more about Teams, and I will focus a little bit about that. But also, just to give you a couple tidbits of insight, Microsoft is just investing so heavily in Teams. This is really the future as far as collaboration and file collaboration goes, and small group team-based collaboration. Teams is the product. So it's something to get used to. And as you start to think about, how are we going to organize the wealth of our content? I like to think about it in terms of what type of repository is it that organizations or groups need. For the most part, you might be able to generalize for a lot of departments what type of repositories they're going to need, but every so often there are differences. There are different file types. There are different use cases, and a lot of that can exist within the confines of a department, and you can train some power users within a department to be able to acknowledge and reconcile and deal with those one-off requirements that they have. But for anything that's organization-wide, like a knowledge base, like a community of practice structure, where you do want some consistency in how files are treated, how they're managed, I do think it's good to take that enterprise global view of how those types of files are treated, where they're stored, how they're classified, and to put some organization around it. So, but otherwise, individual content, active project team content that may exist in Teams, I like to leave that a lot looser, and you have some governance around who can create a team, and and you leave, some of the governance a lot more loose with teams, but you do put a little structure around it. But then for your other repositories, you put a little bit more structure, you put a little more thought for consistency, for ease of use, for common general understanding. But again, I like to keep these pieces very, very simple. And then, no document management conversation would be complete without talking about some policies. Governance is still a very large part of how it is document management, essentially. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm working with different groups is to just introduce some basic content policies. And these are policies that should be really simple, but just get everyone, on the same page. And, I love this analogy. We give everyone a wide boulevard with high curbs. So everyone has a lot of latitude to leverage the tools, how they need to leverage them so that they can be useful and helpful, and we are not too prescribed. But at the same time, we are all on the same road together, and we're all playing. We all have that shared responsibility of being good stewards in these shared repositories with one another. And so, simple principles: all content is posted in just one place. Editing in place, don't create new versions. Leverage the tool, trust the tool to create new versions. And that trust might be hard for organizations that are not familiar with a content management system. And that's something that training and just getting folks to use it, that will hopefully build that type of trust. Site owners and document library owners, they are accountable, but everyone is responsible for content management. And what does that mean? What does that mean for your organization? What does content management mean? Does it mean that everything is tagged? I mean, I certainly hope not everything has to be tagged, because that could be a little onerous, but just the idea that we're editing in place, we don't have versions laying around, we're linking content, we're not sharing attachments, we're sending links, we don't have copyrighted material. So a lot of these are just common sense, and you can build in a few more that may be relative to you. As we start getting closer to the demo, I like to kind of start putting everything into a frame of reference with regard to the technology. Last conversation, I shared this document lifecycle. So this is a little bit more of an expanded document lifecycle, but I think that this is kind of the reality of what a document may take shape. We start with some sort of template. We start off with some sort of form, and the template could be many things. Maybe it's last month's meeting, that we just take the agenda from last month's meeting, and we start from that, and that's our template, and then we create next month's agenda off of that. So that could be a template, but in some form or another, we're starting from something usually. And then we create our unique document. And from that unique document, we have and engage multiple authors. And this could just be, hey, can you take a look at this for me? I would love to get your feedback, or can you come into this document? Can you add your section? So through that process, you end up with your final draft that perhaps gets shared with a larger group of people. Then we publish that document somehow, some way. And by publishing, it just may mean maybe this file is ready to go to the client, or we're ready to share this contract with the client, or we're ready to engage our partners outside. And as a result, you've created some type of artifact. And how do you want to treat that artifact? Do you want to reuse that artifact for anything? Where does that live? Do we need to impose any other type of restriction on that file so that we ensure that it remains a pristine artifact. And that's kind of where we get to then perhaps saving the file as a record. So not everything ends up getting saved as a record. I'd say in reality, most things don't get saved as records. But I do think that as these technologies mature, as organizations modernize their file management practices, electronic records management is becoming more and more the norm. Okay, so now we're going to simplify this a little bit. And this is really the basic document management lifecycle in a document library. And so this is kind of the intersection of what I just showed you, that process, in a much more simplified, kind of realistic perspective. So our template or form, it can come in a lot of different shapes. It could be a content type. We can register a template with a content type. And that content type can be associated with a document library. So when you click on new, you can select that content type. It's going to have all the right metadata associated with it. It's going to have the right Word or PowerPoint or Excel template associated and pre-formatted content associated with it. And similar, we can also have Word templates. So we want everything in this library. It's a contracts library. We're going to just start everybody with that template, that contract template, and that's going to make it easier for us to ensure consistency. What I know doesn't happen often is kind of that rigor around templates. We end up just storing a file in a library, and that file becomes the de facto template reference that people use to start their work from. And like the agenda example, you start something from the last month. I do it all the time. I'm guilty of it as well, because work happens, right? Life happens, and that can be an okay process. Is it repeatable beyond a small group of people? Probably not, because then you still have some friction in that process. So I would say for any document library or any document lifecycle where there is a lot of rigor, where you have a lot of hands, and there is compliance and or records kind of tied to it, it's important to highlight that template that you want people to use in your document library. And Word templates, content types are going to probably be your best bet for influencing that type of rigor into a document library. And then with modern document libraries, you also have the feature of being able to pin files to the top of the library. And that highlight could also act as a call out to say, this is the file that we start work from. And so when someone asks you, oh, where can I find, the template to start this document? You can tell them, oh, if you go to this library, it's already pinned to the top. Working documents. This is essentially every file in a document library. So if it hasn't already been declared a record, if it is, this is every document. So once it's created, it's in there, and whoever, even if nothing ever happens to it, it's still a working doc, and it's editable. People can influence it, and it may or may not ever see any sort of final form. Your final doc, and this may only occur for certain types of files, that it requires the rigor of becoming a final doc. I know when I work on proposals, there's always a final proposal, and there is a final document that I'll produce as a result of that. And that's a document that I get buy-in on. I collaborate with colleagues, and there's a final version that we lock down, and that we'll send out to a prospect. However, along the way, I may produce a bunch of other files that I use in order to support the creation of this proposal, this final doc. And so what will end up happening is, in my process from template to working doc. I'll end up creating 5 working docs to produce one final doc. And that could be my proposal. And that content type, that final document, I want to preserve that. I want to acknowledge that and make sure that I'm able to find that final document a lot more easily than perhaps maybe the other working documents that I created to support this. So with this, maybe certain actions need to be taken, different actions for the final document. I may want to acknowledge this final document with a different content type. I may want to change the security on this document so that it's not editable by others anymore. I may want to move it to a different library where we put these final documents so that I can trust that it is in its final form, or link it to a different library where I can then go and know that those are the final documents. One thing that I did not put on here for final document is PDFing. And that is something you can do as well. It's not really a direct function of SharePoint and of a document library, but there is a flow where you can have a file converted to a PDF. There are a lot of work processes in place to have a final doc be PDF'd, and that PDF resides in a different library and you make it uneditable. So I think it really depends, and this process ultimately gets influenced by your work processes. So going back to my proposal analogy that I gave you, we PDF our proposals before we send them out, and now I have a PDF file. So I have the Word file and I have the PDF file, and I want to store both of them. So I do have a final doc that is PDF'd, and I haven't changed the security, but maybe I want to change the content type as, final submitted or something along those lines. So I think that as you define this process in your document library, it's important to influence and consider the actions that the technology does not, that you would want to influence with the technology, the work process that you have offline as well. And then the last piece is if the file needs to be declared as a record. And you can do this in the document library. There are a couple of different options. Information management policies in the document library and for the site collection, as well as labels at the Office 365 global level. And so I'll show you a little bit more about some of the differences there. So just to touch on classic versus modern document libraries. There has been a lot of conversation over the past year around, do I stay classic? Do I go to modern? And for anyone who hasn't been a part of this conversation, classic is classic SharePoint, and modern is a new interface. It's a new type of templates that Microsoft is introducing in Office 365. A good way to think about classic versus modern is like any other SharePoint new release. So as we have SharePoint MOS 2007, we have SharePoint 2010, we have SharePoint 2013, and now because Office 365 doesn't have any versions that come after it, modern is like the Office 365 2017, essentially. And Classic still exists, but all of Microsoft's investments and development are coming in this modern framework. So you can still live in classic mode, but the future really is going to be in modern sites, site collections, and modern document libraries. And so kind of before we really dive into some of these features here, I think it's also really important to note that modern came out, what is it? It's been over a year, and maybe even 2 years, I want to say, but it just sort of happened one day. And the modern libraries, modern document libraries, in no way had the same amount of features that Classic did. And especially as someone like myself who really cares about a lot of the classification features and some of the governance features that you can have with Classic, when Modern came out, they had none of that. It was very simple. It was just a document library, and it was a really hard sell. It was a really hard sell to start using modern document libraries because you didn't have the same rich features that you came to know and love with a classic document library. But now, today, and it's great that we're having this conversation on the Friday after Ignite. But um, modern document libraries have come a long way, and they are a lot more comparable in features, and they're going to start to surpass the capability of Classic very soon. However, with that said, if you are a legacy SharePoint user and there are some features that your users have come to know and to love and to employ, because you guys have really tinkered under the hood, then it may be that you don't use modern document libraries for a little while if there is a particular feature that you are very wedded to. So I'm not going to belabor this list, but I'm going to just make the recommendation that you go with modern, especially if you are not familiar with SharePoint, your users are not familiar with SharePoint, go with modern. And don't even bother with the debate. If you are a legacy SharePoint user, you may need to compare features a little bit more. Okay, so quick note about document libraries in Teams. Coming this quarter, so a files tab in a team is equivalent to a folder in a document library. So every channel or every team in Teams gets a document library, and it corresponds with a modern team site. And that document library that you have in the team at the current moment is not comparable to a modern document library in the SharePoint view. However, this quarter, it is going to be the same. It will be the same document library in SharePoint or Teams. So before, if you needed a lot of rigor, you wanted all the capabilities and the power of a document library in SharePoint, you may have strayed away from using Teams and really committing to the Teams path. But my point in this conversation is that it is happening this quarter, that the document libraries will be the same. And I don't think there's any reason to hold yourself back from committing to a Teams path for document management and for including Teams in your overall document management strategy or introducing it, just because Teams is great. Teams is really, really great. And the fact that this is coming, it really shouldn't stop you at all. So I'll show you this in the demo, but folders and document libraries correspond with Teams channels files. So every team gets a document library, gets a team site, and for the different channels that you have, it creates a folder in that shared documents library. All right, tips for classification. There are several different types of classification that you can impose into a document library that that you can manage at varying different levels that give you different levels of classification for your files. So for manage metadata, this is something that's intended to be a lot more global. I like to think of this as your controlled vocabularies that are standard across your organization. And this can be, if you're a global relief organization, maybe you have a certain taxonomy defined for the classification of the world that your organization follows. And that would be a really good controlled vocabulary to institute that would then be used across multiple site collections as another means of classification. So this is really where your traditional taxonomy and your controlled vocabularies can be registered as a resource and leveraged across different document libraries. So I think it's always good, as far as your IA is concerned, to identify those metadata fields and to identify those controlled vocabularies and to roll those out as you're planning out your file repositories. Content types. Content types are great. And what I always recommend is to plan out some content types at the global level that institute certain policies and metadata fields and or formatting or information management policy that you want files to adhere to across a global level, and then to let different groups build their own content types off of your global ones. So create global content types for your organization or for certain departments based on regulation, compliance, formatting issues, and then allow the site owners or the content managers of the individual groups and document libraries create their own off of your global. Folders. I have nothing against folders. I do have something against 8 levels of folders, and especially moving from a file share environment, this can be a really bad habit to break. SharePoint and document libraries should not become 8 levels of folders. And so that is my PSA for the day. Don't let your folders become too many. So leverage some of these other constructs like metadata and columns to provide you with additional classification to resist the urge for 8 levels of folders. 1 or 2, I think that's totally fine. But that should be the credo as far as when you're reorganizing and managing content in document libraries. So then your metadata and columns, these are liberal. These are your tools. These are, this is your way of creating greater levels of classification that you typically got from 8 levels of folders in, 1 or 2. And I think that that metadata and columns are such a great resource for document libraries. It really is one of the most powerful features that you can have. So train your users, train your document library managers, content managers, site owners, how to effectively manage site metadata and columns, how to create them, how to leverage parent columns, how to manage metadata for your columns. This is a really great training piece in how to institute document management. And then the last piece is labels. And labels allow you to create that file plan across the organization. So if you have records managers or you have a records management schedule, start your label building off of that schedule. And this is a global construct that you'll be able to then use to release out to the organization. Okay. I'm sorry I'm a little long-winded, and I haven't left us much time for the demo, but I'm very excited about all this stuff. So here is my homepage for Bean Burrito. Bean Burrito is our fictional company, fast food chain that is leveraging a SharePoint site and a document library. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our documents for Bean Burrito. And, please forgive the fact that I don't have that many documents. And here, this is a demo environment. And and I don't have that many documents. The reality is, some of these document libraries can become extremely large and have a lot of documents, and it will make and require you to have a lot more columns and or potentially folders in order to maintain organization. For this, the all intents and purposes, this is a single document library for our bean burrito, and we have a bunch of different documents in here, and I have a couple of different metadata fields. I just have location, year, and burrito file. So all of these documents are all kind of mishmashed in here, but I have some additional classification that I can leverage to make it easier for my groups to see content. So if I want to organize things by burrito file, I can do the group by. And the group by is just a classic SharePoint view that gives you kind of that expand, contract capability, and almost like a folder, like a one level folder like experience. So my folder being marketing, my folder being operations, and recipes that allow me to see different files grouped by. So if I wanted to kind of open or contract, I can then see those files and see all of the different recipes. I can see, what year it was maybe created, and then what location it belongs to. I've got a couple strategy files as well. So I can also change my view and save my views. I did save a view for this burrito file group by view, but I could also do group by year. And modern document libraries have made it just so much simpler for us to view content and to create columns and to manage and view content these different ways. So I'm going to go back to my burrito file. I can add a column, and if any of you are familiar with SharePoint, it used to be really a lot of different clicks in order to create a file. It's so much easier, or create a column, excuse me. It's so much easier now to create a column. I can do it right from the library interface, and create a new column for, let's see, we can create a new column for, we'll say final version. And we'll just make it a yes or no checkbox. And we're going to add it to all content types. So now we have our final version column that I just created. And we can also go back to our all documents view really quickly. I'm going to do a quick edit and apply the new metadata field. So features for this did exist in SharePoint. This kind of, okay, it's not showing up. But in any case, it allows you to quickly edit your files. So I am going to go, just because we're short of time, I'm not going to try and play with that. We're going to go into our library settings. I do want to highlight permissions. So one of the biggest distinctions with a modern library versus a classic library is the types of permission schemas that you get with the creation of your document library. So you have members, owners, and visitors, and it corresponds accordingly to read, edit, and full control. So your members have the ability to add, to edit, to interact with content in your document library. So it's a pretty simple construct, and you're able to have your own groups in a classic document library, and you inherit and you can leverage the groups in SharePoint for your document library. So the inheritance for this is just going to come from the site collection. It's no longer that kind of trickle down through different site collections, and parent site type relationship. So it's a different schema if you are familiar with SharePoint, and sometimes it may be a little limiting depending on how you've set up your permission schema, but just kind of know that it's a very simple, it's a very straightforward way to do it. And then in the site collection settings, then you can make this site collection available to external users. And this is an admin feature that you would want to impose to make the site collection accessible to external users. So when you do that, you'll be able to share files from this document library then with an external user who is outside your organization. So that's some simple permissions. And then I'm going to also show you just a little bit about information management policies and records retention. So there are two ways that you can institute records management, and both of these require some planning so that you can leverage them and make sure that you're keeping track of your organization. But under your information management policies, I only have two content types associated in here, but it's just the standard document and the standard folder. And records retention policy right now is not turned on, but you can create your own content type, and for instance, I could create a content type for recipes. Say I wanted to, for this setting, I wanted to keep the records retention I wanted to retain my recipes forever. And I could associate that with a content type and then turn that on to yes. The other area where you would want to change some of the settings in your document library, in your advanced settings, you do want to allow the management of content types, but there's also the ability to associate a Word doc as a template URL that lives in your forms library. And the other setting is right there. So when we click on documents, so I have set up, I have pinned two documents here, but I have set up a specific document for this particular document library as a template, and it may take a couple of minutes to get through there. But one of the other pieces that we have, and so it's going to initiate the creation of a new document, and I have, kind of just a loosely formatted Word document that I've associated with my document library. So you can register your templates in the new drop-down menu. You can also leverage a flow, and so you'll notice that this is accessible. This is accessible to users as well, and you can also disable this if this is something that you don't want to do. But I do have a flow created with my document library, so I could be working in my OneDrive on a file, and I could be working on the schedule for our employees for the next week, and I'm ready to share it and move it into that library. So now I'm going to move it into publish to team, and so I can make sure I control my documents and I keep the control copy. In here, I can move that document into publish to team. And what I've done is I've created a flow that will move that document, copy that document into this document library after I've moved it. So it will still exist in my OneDrive, but it copies the document and maintains a copy of the file and moves it to an area that's shared. So and why this is good, we want to control versions. We don't want multiple versions of files moving around. So this is one example of moving a file from a OneDrive, or copying a file from a OneDrive into a shared document library. Coming later this quarter, Microsoft is going to be introducing moving, copying files between document libraries. So you'd be able to set up a flow that when, triggered perhaps by metadata fields. So I had final version as a column that I created. So perhaps once I triggered yes, I have a final version, that file would then get copied to like a best practices library or a final proposal library that I can then use as a reference and have a more consolidated view of a bunch of different files. So I'm going to refresh this quickly and see if my document has moved over. It doesn't seem like it has, but I can go to my flow and see if my flow has, oh, it looks like I have a broken connection. Okay. Well, so that's kind of the idea behind there. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to show you those pieces there. I am gonna wrap us up quickly just because we are at time, and I do want to show you. So what's coming next? News from Ignite 2018. This is a screenshot of a blog post that Chris McNulty put out. And I thought that this one was kind of the most noteworthy one. I also have a link to the OneDrive for Business update as well. But I would encourage you to read, if you did not go to Ignite, take a look at what happened this week and what news is coming out. I just highlighted a few notable items that I'm really excited about. One is document templates, which we already saw. That is already rolled in, and it was in my demo. Modern document sets. So if you are used to using document sets in SharePoint classic document libraries, it is finally coming to modern document libraries. And flow for document management. So as I mentioned, being able to move and copy files within Office 365 and generate shareable links through flow. That is coming in Q4. And then file plans and labels. We didn't even really get into records management quite as much, and I wasn't able to show you where those files are. But I also wanted to highlight a link from for Stephen Rose's post on OneDrive for Business updates from Ignite. What is different about these updates, you'll see a lot more around document syncing from OneDrive for Business, and you'll see a lot more around mobile capabilities, new features coming to the apps for iOS and Android, and Office improvements as well. So with that, there's so much information, and I would love to continue the conversation. So I'm sorry that we got a little bit rushed there at the end. I will leave more time for the demo next time, I promise. But if you are interested in having a conversation with us about your Office 365 document management strategy, or just strategy in general and how to get started with Office 365, definitely reach out to us. We have a new guide, 6 areas to start leveraging in your Office. Your 6 areas to start leveraging your Office 365 investment. And we also have the strategy engagement, like I said, that we can work with you more hands-on and with a little bit more time to show you some more of these features and to put into context your environment and your requirements and how your people work into Office 365, and how do you leverage these tools to make it work for your company and the way your people like to work. So with that, I really do thank you for your time today, and I hope that some of this has been useful. We will be coming back with the recording. We'll send out the recording for this webinar, and if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly and ask me what your thoughts are, and let me know, what we can help you with. So please enjoy your Friday. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.